Hello, this is Brian with Allen Engineering, and today we need to talk about the Recce Rifles. So a while ago, I posted a blog and we put out a video titled The Gordon Carbines. If you haven't read that, go check it out. In it, I explained the misconception with the Gordon Carbines using the AEM5 and how that came about. This misconception arose because people would see photos of the Delta operators and their carbines and the Ops Inc. suppressor that was being run on it. And they thought it looked a lot like the AEM5, so naturally they assumed it was the AEM5. But that was incorrect. It was actually a variant of the M4 suppressor. We are now calling the M4 Delta. Now we need to have a similar conversation about the DEVGRU Recce rifles. To set some expectations, I have a lot of internal and external AE sources that has confirmed to me everything I'm about to say to you guys. However, I cannot divulge a lot of that hard evidence. However, I can use logic and reasoning to support these arguments. The misconception is that DEVGRU used 12th models or AEM5s. This is not true. This misconception arose very similarly to the Gordon Carbine misconception. People would see photos of DEVGRU operators and their Recce rifles, and the suppressor being used looked a lot like the AEM5. So naturally they assumed it was an AEM5. This one misconception led to further misconceptions about the barrels being used with these rifles, and we later had these two incorrect pieces of information somewhat supporting each other. So let's start from the beginning. Who actually used these suppressors and these rifles? A lot of people think that the Navy SEALs used them. That isn't necessarily correct. In actuality, it was a specific group within the SEALs called Development Group, or DEVGRU. They are the Navy's JSOC component, and they are tasked with developing equipment and tactics. And the way we know that DEVGRU was using these rifles is because of the photos. So in a lot of these photos, the operators are showing their squadron flags, which are specific to Development Group. So it's important to understand the difference between Standard Navy SEALs and Development Group because each one has different procurement channels. So the SEALs operate under SOCOM, which has its own funding and procurement channels. DEVGRU has Tier 1 unit autonomy, which allows them to acquire equipment quickly and without the bureaucracy of standard military procurement. This allows DEVGRU to get equipment a lot quicker and tailored for their specific needs. It's also well known that Phil Seberger of Ops Inc. would often make custom suppressors for different Tier 1 units and different military programs. The earliest example is the Gordon Carbine. Those M4 Delta suppressors were made for Delta operators. It wasn't a big military contract. Instead, they were made for Tier 1 units. One thing that not many people know about that kind of puts a damper on this idea that DEVGRU used AEM5s is that the Recce program actually predates the Mark 12 program. These suppressors were manufactured in the mid-90s, while the Mark 12 program started in 2002. So it doesn't really make much sense that the Navy had a bunch of AEM5s laying around because it predates the AEM5. So let's talk a little bit more about the rifles specifically. There are two main variants, the M4 Recce and the 416 Recce. The M4 Recce used a 17-inch M4 Lilja barrel. Now Lilja measures their barrels from the barrel extension to the muzzle. So if you were to measure from the bolt face, which is a little bit more traditional, it would actually come out to be roughly 16.5 inches. Lilja sold a lot of these barrels to Naval Surface Warfare Crane Division, or NSW, back in the late 90s to early 2000s. So DEVGRU actually had a lot of these barrels laying around. And then the second variant of the Recce rifles is going to be the 416 Recce. The 416 Recce uses a 14.5-inch SOCOM profile barrel made by HK. Now, one of the big misconceptions about these rifles is that DEVGRU was cutting down their Lilja and HK barrels. People assumed that since they were running an AEM5 and it was butted up against the Knight's RAS rail, that the barrel length on the M4 Recce had to be 15.1 inches long. And that also happened with the 416 Recces. People assumed that it was cut down to 13.1 inches. So this makes sense if you're trying to explain how DEVGRU was able to fit up the AEM5 to these rifles, but it makes a little bit more sense if DEVGRU was actually ordering OpSync suppressors that could work with the factory Lilja and HK barrels instead of having to cut them all down to weird sizes. So let's talk about what this DEVGRU suppressor actually is. Its model is the M4, but we refer to it as the M4 Recce suppressor. So it looks a lot like an AEM5, but it has a much different mounting configuration. So the suppressor mounts over the barrel roughly 4 inches, and the suppressor is 9¼ inch long. So the suppressor is direct thread, and it uses the smaller diameter taper like the M4 Delta suppressors. However, it uses a slightly shorter mounting length. So the original collars for these rifles were not made at OpSync or Allen Engineering, so you can assume that they were actually being custom made at DEVGRU. So let's take a look at one of the collars. This is going to be on the M4 Recce. So you can see that the collar mounts up very similarly to the old 15.1 Recces, where the taper is at the end of the Knight's rail. However, the collar mounts the barrel slightly differently. So these collars actually secure differently than the Mark 12 SPR collars. So there is no step on this barrel for the collar to sit against. The way these collars are properly mounted to the barrel is by being bedded in red Loctite and secured by a set screw. This isn't the most durable or user-friendly method of installing a collar, so we will actually be developing a Recce barrel print that will give these collars a step to sit against. So the clone correct method would be to mount the M4 Recce collar to the Lilja barrel by bedding it in red Loctite and securing it with a set screw. However, a more user-friendly method would be to have your barrel profiled to the Recce barrel print. So it's worth noting that when people assumed that these barrels were being cut down to 15.1 and profiled to use Mark 12 hardware, Mark 12 collars cannot work on these factory Lilja barrels. The diameter of the barrel is too thin, and there's no way to profile it to accept an SPR collar. So where do we go moving forward? So we are going to be making these suppressors, and we're going to be naming them the M4 Recce to avoid confusion with some of our other suppressors. When we release these, we will also be changing the model of the Gordon Carbine M4 suppressor to the M4 Delta. And then the AEM4 is going to stay the same. So now let's talk about an exciting collaboration. So for the initial release of the M4 Recce suppressors, we are collaborating with Infinite Armory to bring you the M4 Recce kit. So the M4 Recce kit is going to feature the M4 Recce suppressor, which we are going to black oxide for this limited release. Black oxide is the original way these suppressors were coated. We will not be offering the black oxide as a coating on non-limited release suppressors because it is extremely labor intensive. The M4 Recce kit is going to feature the 17-inch M4 Lilja barrel. Lilja has kindly offered to engrave these just like the ones from the 90s and early 2000s. So that is going to be another limited feature of this kit. Lastly, we will be including the M4 Recce collar. The collar will be left in the raw, just like the originals, and the barrel is going to be dimpled for its set screw to give it a better hold. The M4 Recce kit is going to be a limited offering from us. We are going to be releasing 2 batches of 25 kits. The first batch should be available in October, November timeframe, and then the second batch will be announced later. So after the release of the Recce kits, we will be making the suppressors, collars, and barrels available on our site individually, but they will not have their unique features that we're making available for this kit. I want to give a special shout out to Infinite Armory, who really put in the work to help make some of this information available to us. Infinite Armory is the best place to buy and sell high-end gear, so check them out. I also want to give a special thanks to Lilja, who is putting in extra work making these barrels available to us with the old school engravings. These suppressors have never been available commercially and have only been sold to DEVGRU. So we're really excited to bring these to the public so you guys can use them. This kit and suppressor is a huge passion project for everyone here at Allen Engineering and at Infinite Armory and Lilja. We're really excited to be able to provide you guys with the most accurate Recce parts that you can get. So if you want to learn more about it, check out aesuppressors.com.